I love about the game.
The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
All right, when we had Artie on the show, she was trash talking Mike on some pickleball. Sheree, I understand you're pro pickleball?
I am pro pickleball, but I am not a pickleball pro. How about that?
Very nice, very nice. Welcome back to the Bliss Business Podcast, everyone, where we explore how empathy, connection, and purpose can transform business from the inside out. I'm Steven Sakach, joined by my co-host, Mike Liwski, and today's conversation shines a spotlight on inclusion, a vital yet often misunderstood aspect of modern leadership. Some stats here. According to McKinsey, companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity are 36% more profitable than those in the bottom quartile. Yet, only 31% of employees feel their company is meaningfully committed to these efforts, according to the Harvard Business Review. And our guest today is here to shift that narrative. Mike introduced our guest today.
Oh, thanks, Steven. And yes, we are super excited to welcome Sheree Knowles. She's the CEO of HR Knowledge Source and actually the co-founder as well of the Human Capital Consortium. Sheree is a powerhouse, as many of our listeners already know, in the field of human capital strategy. With over 20 years of executive level HR experience, she's led both enterprise level transformations and grassroots organizational development. And her companies provide strategic consulting, training, and DEI guidance to businesses across the country. She is named one of Atlanta's 100 most powerful and influential women. Sheree is known for helping companies foster workplace cultures rooted in dignity, inclusion, and innovation, which we love to discuss here on this show. So Sheree, welcome to our show. We're so happy to have you with us.
Hey, thank you both and your team for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Sheree, many organizations, I think, sometimes treat inclusivity as kind of maybe like a compliance checkbox or something like that. But, you've built your career helping companies kind of reframe it as a strategic asset. What does inclusivity actually mean at its core, and what does it look like when it's done well?
Yeah, so starting my career in HR like a very long time ago, there was just the diversity, right? And so it was all about the quantity, right, of the representation. And as we started to learn more and started to really expand the narrative around it, inclusion then became a hot topic because inclusion is really about the quality, right, of the representation, the experience. And so you can have all the diversity, you can check off, you can count all the marbles, but if you don't create an ecosystem or a culture that supports the diversity, then you're really not doing very well. And so you're just going to have a bunch of people who might look different, think differently, but they're not acting in one accord and really pushing the business agenda forward.
I really like that highlight.
Nodding the whole time when you're saying all that, for sure. It's like, agree 100%. It's a great explanation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say too, I really love that point about the quality of the inclusion, right? Because saying, hey, we're diverse because we have, these sorts, of individuals, of people in our organization, but are they really, really included? That's a different way to really think about it, Sheree. So question for you as well. So, you've worked in a number of different industries, and as we said in the intro, different size companies, from transforming enterprises to even some of the startups and grassroots efforts. So I'm curious, what are some of the most common barriers, would you say, when you see organizations trying to move into, say, a more inclusive culture? What are some of those barriers?
Yeah, I think for me, what I've seen, two things primarily. One is that organizations are looking for like a quick fix. Mm-hmm. So they're looking for, I'm going to do these 5 things, and in 2 weeks, I'm going to have this amazing transformative organization. And so they're kind of thinking from a checkers perspective versus a chess perspective. And they're not really leaning into the long run and understanding that organization, you can change a policy, you can do this kind of stuff in 2 weeks, but you can't really change a human in 2 weeks. And so it takes more than just one time, two times, even three times of a conversation. So I think that's number one. The other thing is that a lot of people who are in leadership kind of feel like I want to support this effort, but it really doesn't impact me. So there's this level of cognizant dissonance there. Like I'm supportive, but I'm not really involved. And what they fail to miss is that everyone, no matter who you are, you have a role, you have a voice, you have a place on the spectrum. And so if you think it's not about you, that you're just helping other people, you're not really as invested as you could be. So those are things that we see.
Yeah, right. Like avoiding the what's in it for me.
Exactly. Not even realizing that there is something in it for you, right? And so one of the things we do, especially when we're talking to organizations that have a dominant culture, which is typically Caucasian male, we do an exercise to build what we've coined as inclusion empathy. So we ask, and I'll just ask you for a moment, think about a time when you felt left out, like you were excluded from something. So whether it was at work or in your personal life or even growing up. And if you can remember and tap into those feelings, then you've developed a level of empathy for other people. So while you might not walk in their same shoes, you can understand and at least show care for the experience they're having. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I could imagine an instance, and feelings of frustration come up, right? Not great feelings, for sure. So, very good.
Yeah, Sheree, there's research by Deloitte that found like companies with inclusive cultures are 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile. We like to talk about systems a lot on the show, and trying to give our audience a good idea of things you can do. And, I always picture these as love-based systems. Like, we may not call it that, but what kind of systems or strategies do you help companies implement that kind of foster that belonging and equity in the workplace?
Yeah, we do it really from a couple of perspectives. So I'll start with hiring. So going beyond just someone's resume or only focusing on the gaps in the resume, but really getting to know whole person. So when you're interviewing candidates, asking questions and opening and holding space for them to talk about things that really bring them to life as a full candidate. So making hiring decisions around whole person is what we call it versus just a resume. So that's one example. When they're in the organization, another example could be how you structure meetings. There's been a lot of work done and a lot of conversation around introversion versus extroversion. And as someone who identifies as mostly an introvert, giving me an agenda ahead of time so I can think about what I want to say in the meeting versus just me showing up and then you pass out the agenda and I'm expected to think on the fly. That if you do that, that creates a culture of inclusion, right? So it gives everybody an opportunity to approach it in whatever form or manner is best for them. I would say another thing could be around peer recognition. So we talk about that a lot. How do you give others a chance to be recognized in a way that makes sense for them? Not everyone wants a public recognition. They don't want to, pat on the back in front of, 25 people. Maybe they just want a private note from their leader. So those are some examples of things that we talk to companies about, that whatever fits the culture, right? We're going to help you think about how to do that more effectively.
Yeah, we do a lot of peer-to-peer recognition, in our company, and that shift from versus leadership recognition, that shift just made it made such a huge difference. I thought, because, and I always say it's, with leadership, maybe it's 1 or 2 people carrying that torch, but now you got, with our company, you got 40 people, carrying those torches now. And so you just stand back, you're like, wow. And people are able to kind of freely give and receive recognition through a few different processes. But that was really like a big change for us that, we just again, this is pursuing like what would love like look like in a system. This looks like one. Let's try it out, and it just organically took off. I was like, even, I'm going to be hands off on this because I don't want it to be like me forcing the issue. And literally, I don't know if they've noticed that, but I do not really participate in the peer to peer. I let them do it so that they're just doing it, naturally.
Like, who knows the colleague better than the person working alongside them? Like, for real.
Yeah.
Like, if you think back to other roles that you've had, you also knew when someone wasn't carrying their fair share of the weight. So you know the opposite of that when they are going above and beyond to be kind and respectful to each other or to pitch in and help out. So yeah, I think that's a really great way to just empower people to celebrate other people.
Yeah, we shift to this self-managed sort of structure too, where it's allowing them, if they want, to step into leadership roles or to step back and followers, but they're working more as teams together. Mm-hmm. And so you combining that sort of recognition, the peer-to-peer thing with that self-managed team is very empowering, I think. And we're seeing, people in our own staff that step into roles that, previously I was like, well, why wasn't that there? Well, because we didn't provide kind of an opportunity for that. So, Mike, you're about to say something before I.
Before you jump out, but I mean, to your point that you just made there, Stephen, it is, really a beautiful thing because I felt like before, folks on our team would just fall into a certain role and they, felt like, okay, this is probably what I do and this is my level of contribution. And, now we're, moving at a much quicker pace, I feel, as an organization, and others are doing a lot, more things. So there's benefit actually to both ways because they're getting the experience of doing something a lot different, right? But they get the support from their colleagues around them, and then the company's getting the benefit of these individuals on the team, kind of spreading their wings, doing more, and contributing into other places. So, but yeah, no, what I was gonna ask about for Sheree, one of the things I noticed in prepping for the show was when it comes to performance reviews, right? Because some organizations will still use performance reviews, and sometimes they can be a very scary thing. But what are your suggestions to organizations that maybe how do they embed inclusion into the performance reviews? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm going to probably take a little bit of a contrarian approach to this, right? So I believe in disruptive HR, which means you do the things that make sense and the things that don't, you stop. And performance reviews in the traditional sense is all about looking backwards, right? I'm looking in the rear view mirror to see what someone I'm judging, assessing what they've done over the last 12 months. One, as a leader and as an employee, do you really remember what you did 12 months ago? So let's just start there. How good or bad? Most of the time that leaders remember the things that didn't go so well, but not always the things that went well. And so I think performance just ought to be a conversation. It should be a regular conversation. So if you and I are having one-on-ones on a regular basis, we're talking about performance. We're talking about you, whole person, because that's still a thing. But I don't have to necessarily think back 12 months ago or 11 months ago to remember all the things you've done. So I understand performance reviews, and I know some companies attach that to compensation, but truthfully, if they could separate those two things and just treat performance like a conversation, they'd be better off. So that's my.
Got it. And so I guess maybe in that conversation, you should have, I think, like a regular touch point about inclusion, I guess, right? Like making inclusion an important part of that conversation.
Yeah, but not making it a thing, Mike. So if you and I are having regular one-on-ones and I'm asking you, how are you doing? Do you feel supported? How can I knock down a roadblock? Like, what are you facing? So my job as your leader is to kind of make a pathway for you to be great, right, to be your best self. And so if my questions are around how I make it smoother for you, then I'm being inclusive because you're able to share what works best for you. Remember, it's about your quality of your experience with me and with the company. So yeah, that's the way I would approach it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's a different way to go about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned like the whole person, viewing the whole person, and that's how I kind of view sort of HR as in a way as this employee wholeness. Like, how
Mhm.
can we make you better at these different areas of you? You come to us, and we see you've got a lot of strengths, and maybe you've got things you want to work on. How can we help you just
Right.
be a better version of you? Is that kind of how you really think of where
We
maybe HR is, where it should be going?
is definitely, I think some HR have kind of transformed into this approach with their leaders. Others are maybe still on the journey trying to get there. The culture has to support that, right? So it has to be viewed as important from senior leaders, and HR needs the space to be creative in that aspect. But I do think a lot of HR leaders are moving there, as well as just people leaders. One of the things I wanted to say to you, Mike, as well,
Yeah.
when we think about performance, that's the employee side. But when I'm thinking about leaders, like I do believe that leaders ought to have some ownership around inclusion, and it ought to be able to be included in something that's being measured. So, um, whether that is a pulse survey from that department, whether it is conversations with HR, whether it is a formal engagement survey, whatever it might be, the method of that, I do think leaders ought to be held accountable or demonstrate ownership around keeping inclusion. We have a class that we call leading through the lens of inclusion, and is really all about that. Like, how do
Mm.
I still manage to get results, still manage to meet my deadlines, to manage to meet whatever the stakeholders' expectations are of me as a leader, and show care to my team, bring my team along for the journey. And so maybe I'm demonstrating vulnerability as an example, right? To say, you know what, I made a mistake yesterday. So here's how I'm owning that. Here's how I'm recovering from it. Or this is what's happening. I'm hearing these changes, and I don't really know the answer yet, but I am working alongside you with my leaders to figure it out. So leaders don't always like to kind of peel back the onion a little bit and show vulnerability, but that's a great way of demonstrating that inclusion behavior that Deloitte talks about.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, especially on the leadership side. It's important that we've got to have accountability, right? For sure, for everyone. But I do think that vulnerability from leadership kind of creates that safe environment that people can feel free to speak up if something just doesn't sit right with them. And feel free, like they're going to get they're going to be heard and seen in
Right.
that regard. And I think that, yeah, if leadership, I think there's this idea that you can't be vulnerable because you
Absolutely.
have to show the strength at all times or whatever. But it really is a strength when you show that is the way I think about that.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk a little about purpose? We do that a lot on the show. Mike, you've got a question
Yeah.
that you always ask all of our guests
Yeah.
related to purpose, and
Yeah.
angle it here a little bit for this topic.
Yeah, I know. Sheree's ready for it. Yeah. So Sheree, as Steve mentioned, we do love to talk about purpose on our show. Even in as an agency, we find that the best relationships we have with our clients is when we come with them to understand their why,
Mhm.
and then communicate that and then it really builds like the strongest connections that we have. So yeah, the question I love to ask guests on the show is really in your work or for your organization or just in your experience, when it comes to purpose, what would you say having a well-defined purpose serves in the success of an organization?
Yeah, I think purpose is everything. So you need, of course, great people. You need to have a great profit, right? Like, you're not in business to just give away your money. But if you don't have purpose, if you don't have like that North Star, if you will, for people
Mhm.
to connect with, especially when times of uncertainty are happening, especially when the organization is changing, if there's nothing to hold on to, then people kind of like, one, make up their own stories, but two, they check out. And so purpose really is I would say the thread or the glue that really holds the culture together. And if organizations can help define what purpose, not just the definition of what it is, but what it looks like in everyday behavior, then, or what it looks like even in my role. So how does what I do ladder up to this bigger mission or this purpose? When companies do that, they're really onto something. It's incredible to see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's really well, put, right? Because everyone, starts to sort of move in the same direction. I love your, idea and your thought about it being your North Star. And, I think for leaders and for organizations that can articulate cleanly, a memorable purpose that everyone can kind of, really rally around.
Exactly.
I'm also curious when it comes to the point about inclusivity. Still staying on this topic of purpose and impact. So how, for example, like does an inclusive culture, would you say, influence the perception of a brand or customer loyalties? Like what impact does, being inclusive have on the business?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of a client. We worked with them last year to really think about the why. So they know the what, right? They know what they do and they know their customer demographic, but the why was a little murky for their staff. And they ended up, and you made me think about it when you said the rallying cry, one band, one sound. And so what it meant was we are one organization. We all have, I wish I had some instruments here. Actually, I do. So we all have a variety of instruments, right? That do a certain thing, but we're creating one sound, meaning we're having one level of harmonious impact on the people we serve. So that's an example.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I love that you threw the word harmonious in there because I really find that it creates harmony. For sure.
I love that she's got a maraca just handy. What's
going
on?
We use it in our meetings all the time. We celebrate people this way. So yes.
All right, wait. So how do you use it? Did you say to celebrate people?
Yes. So in our meetings, we always start with a cup of inspiration. So some amazing quote, a scripture, something to really get people to, before we jump into the topics, right, the meeting, to really kind of check in and with themselves. We do deep breathing, all sorts of like woo-woo stuff. Because
I love it. No, bring it. This is what this is.
This is how we are. So I'm very much into somatic mind body work, and so we'll do all sorts of things. But we have this cup of inspiration, and when people are doing something well, and we're like celebrating. You met Artie, so she's got a handful of these too. But we celebrate people. We're just like and so that's what we do to make people feel included in our own organization. Our North Star, our purpose is that we impact the world one employee at a time. So whatever we do for our clients, we know that it's impacting their employees. Those people are taking it home to impact their families and so on and so on. And so we may never see the full impact of all the good we do in the world, but we know we're doing good and we trust that something good is happening. So that's just an example of the way we do things.
Yeah, it has a ripple effect for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm trying to pull out more examples like this in our conversations because I think it's something that people can relate to easily and be like, oh, I want to try that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you're able to share some of your internal processes there. Getting back a little bit on our topic here, we talked about leaders being vulnerable and some might feel, a little overwhelmed or afraid to make mistakes in this particular space for sure. So what's your advice to leaders who want to foster inclusivity, but feel uncertain about where to begin?
I think there's two things. One, acknowledging where you are. So leaders, especially manager, director, even VP level leaders, kind of feel a leadership squeeze because they're getting it from their staff, questions, frustrations, they're navigating the day-to-day, but they're also getting this pressure from top line executive leaders. And so they're kind of caught in the middle. And so just owning that to start with, right? To say, okay, let me tap into my feelings around this, and then understanding what emotional intelligence looks like. So Emotional intelligence doesn't mean that you are a weak leader. In fact, it's the opposite of that. If you are able to articulate where you're struggling, if you've got a mentor, somebody that you trust, that you can just kind of release it as opposed to dumping it onto your staff, that will help tremendously. So for those leaders, I would say start with the first, just checking in, like, and acknowledging where you are. 2, finding a safe space to talk. Sometimes it's kind of lonely at that leadership level because they don't necessarily know who to talk to. So finding a safe space. And then the third thing that I would say is goes back to that vulnerability and around emotional intelligence. Do an EI assessment. We talk about AI a lot, and that's great. But if you don't have EI, then the AI and the EI, they need to cohabitate very well. So that's my suggestion.
Very true.
Yeah, we do a lot of training on EQ and things at our office. Is that like something that you bring to the table a lot of times for companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're certified in emotional intelligence, DISC, like lots of different assessments to help leaders really understand. Because, not just what you're doing well and not just what you're doing like that you could be doing better, but how it all comes back to you, right? Whole person, to be your authentic self. So we will do these assessments. We have leadership coaches. We sit down with teams and individuals if they want to really talk through like where you are and where you're trying to go as a leader. We do it in a non-threatening way because, again, I think leaders have a lot of pressure on them. And so this can't be just one more thing that's like on my right, like talking in my ear, but how do I really incorporate that into my everyday of who I am? And that means I go home with my emotional intelligence, right? I don't just leave it at work. So that's the way we approach it.
Yeah, I've got to think, Sheree, that there's probably so much just like pleasure that comes out of the work that you do. I'm curious if maybe for our audience, if you could share maybe a couple examples or an example that you're really proud of in terms of the work. What did you see going into the situation? What did you maybe do with the organization? Again, you don't need to tell us who the organization was, and then coming out of that, what was the transformation like? Is I'm guessing there's probably tons of examples coming to your mind on that.
Yeah, one comes to mind immediately. And I am so proud of this organization, but I would say pre-COVID, so we'll kind of start back there, like 2018, 2017. They were a really small but growing organization, and everyone had been there for a long time. So there was this very familiar culture, right? It was almost like a family. They decided that they were going to capture additional market share and grow, and they started adding new people who weren't referred by the other people, right? And so it became this organization where people really wanted to contribute, have a voice, share new ideas. There was this contrasting view of we've always done it this certain way, and if it ain't broke, don't change it sort of mentality, right? Yeah. And when we came on the scene, there was really kind of like two camps, and it was a us versus them, all trying to do the right thing, but just not connecting and communicating. And so one of the things we talked about, and goes back to the purpose and the mission, let's figure out where we're trying to go. And then I'll get in the same boat. We're going to be thinking differently, but if we're rowing in the same direction, then we can all get to, the apex or the finish line. Right. And we talked a lot about intentions versus impact. And so people have good intent, but if you don't think about how it lands with the other person, right, the impact of that, then there's a lot of like miscommunication. There are a lot of bad feelings and distrust. So that's where we started. Really helping people think about the North Star, their mission. How do you get them all on the same boat or on the same bus and move things forward? It came, we talked about values, and not just the 5 values that you see pasted on someone's website, but what does it look like when somebody is demonstrating that? Right? So behavior. And when you can identify behavior, people know, like, if you tell me what to do, because I want to intrinsically do a good job, if I know what I'm supposed to do or how I'm supposed to behave or show up, then I will do that. But if you kind of leave it up to my interpretation, I might miss the boat. So work with values. And then here comes COVID. So moving along,
Right.
got this big thing. All people worked in office. It was a really hard thing to get them to even think about people working from home. And then boom, everybody's working from home.
Yeah.
And so the first thing the CEO wanted to do was to have everyone be on video camera. They were using a video technology, a VC technology. People had to basically log in, stay on VC all day. They're not in a meeting.
Geez.
So I can watch you, Mike and Stephen, to make sure
No.
that you were doing your job. And so
This is
after
not
a
a
lot
good
of
idea.
really hard conversations, because we're the ones to have the hard conversations when things don't make sense.
It's like a bad movie.
Right, exactly. So they finally backed off. And now we can advance to post-COVID. Some are back in office, some are working from home, but they've created this really homogenous, and not in a bad way homogenous, not like, everything is like vanilla, but really a harmonious and homogenous relationship with each other. So they do peer recognition. The leaders trust each other, because there was a lot of silos between the leaders, and they trust their staff to do a good job. So we have seen, I would say, over the 5 to 7 years, a really interesting transformation there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. What sorts of behaviors are you seeing now?
So people are not just setting meetings to have hard conversations. They are actually picking up the phone immediately when something doesn't feel right, sound right, smell right. And we're going to hash it out right now, because I assume positive intent. Mike, I know that whatever you said or did, even though I felt scratched by it, I know that wasn't your intention. So I'm going to tell you the impact. Mike, you're going to listen and then own it and feel bad that you made me feel the way, not bad on what your thoughts were, but the impact, right? So you're owning the impact. And so that created a lot of really good conversation. So that's just an example.
Intention and impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to try and assume that someone has a positive intent in what they're doing, and then treat that with grace.
Exactly.
When you go in with grace with that.
Exactly.
You talked a little bit about that stage of the company where it was going through growth and trying to figure out basically its way through growing pains. And that's really when we came up with our bliss concept, was it's this, we're trying to scale, but we're trying to systemize at the same time. And there's these 2 stages of business that happen. And it's like, okay, we need to do this in a loving way. So can we build love into scalable systems? And it's like, oh, hey, this is a thing. Let's do that. And we start adding all these layers to it. And it was around that same time too, 2018, when it was kind of articulate. And we went through the COVID thing. When we hit COVID, we had a lot more trust in our employees, and we were not putting the Big Brother camera on them and traumatizing them for 8 hours a day or whatever. We've got some audience questions here. Let's go to looks like we've got a few. All right, Sheree, what's the one most outdated HR practice holding back inclusion today?
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, so let me see. So asking for one, because I could come up with so many. I would say the one that is holding organizations back today is the feeling that everything and everyone, you have to get the same thing, right? So you talk about fairness and equity and equality. And when you think that everybody needs exactly the same thing, you might miss the boat, because not everybody needs exactly the same thing in order to be efficient and to be successful in your organization. So that's one. And it's really like, I love my HR peeps. So it's really hard as an HR leader to try to think outside the box and create pockets of flexibility, but that's important. And so in the things where you can't have flexibility, like the non-negotiables, they are just what they are. But there's so many other things where we think that you can't be flexible, but you can. So not the stripping away the cookie cutter approach, I think, is a recommendation I would have.
Yeah, I like that.
One size doesn't fit all, for
sure.
Yeah.
All right, we got another audience question here. What advice would you give to a startup founder building a company culture from scratch?
Oh, this is one of my favorite questions. I love startups. So I've been in startups for a long time, big companies, small companies, as you mentioned. And one of the things I really love about startups is that you are still like energized, you're still fresh, everything is still new, like you just could do like anything. And so my suggestion is bring the group together and say, okay, we want to talk about and build a culture that we all feel good about. So let's throw some spaghetti on the wall here together. Let's co-create this as a group. And so then you, the founder, aren't just giving your impression or vision or interpretation of what the culture should be. You certainly influence it, but now you're opening the door for other people to weigh in. So that's what I would say. When if you're starting from scratch, like get a blank piece of paper and go for it. I love that.
Yeah, bliss that culture, and beer in the fridge is not culture. That's not
no. Beer in the fridge is great, but it's not culture.
All right, we got another one. Let's see. Most companies are not prepared for the impact of AI will have on culture. AI demands autonomous, decentralized, people-empowered environments, which are more inclusive. Are you seeing this shift? That's a mouthful. Did you follow all that?
Yeah.
AI demands autonomous, decentralized, people, empowered environments. Okay.
Yeah. So that's a tough question to answer, because I think it depends on the culture. It depends on how well they're embracing AI and what they're using it for. So if it's an organization that is embracing AI, let's say in operational type work. So people are maybe they're automating or using AI to drive more efficiencies in some of the routine or rote tasks. Then the question becomes, before you make that decision, what do you do with the people who are doing those rote tasks, right? Those transactional tasks. And how do you give them additional or an added purpose to do something else? Companies typically, I'm thinking about this question around that decentralization piece of it too. There, you can still decentralize and have unity. So they're not mutually exclusive. I've worked for organizations that were decentralized, like greatly decentralized, and you still can have a level of unity and purpose and that harmony we talked about,
Right.
because
You
you're not
probably
really
need more.
focused
You
as
need
much.
more purpose, I think, in
You
that,
do.
right? 'Cause
Exactly. That's exactly right. And you can still have that. So they're not mutually exclusive. You just got to be careful not to push operational tasks or decision making down so far into the AI models that you stop talking to one another. That's important.
Yeah. And I would add to that, just in general, right? AI, as much as it has, some cognition to it and thinking ability, it's still a technology.
Correct.
And the way that humans have implemented technology, throughout eras that have gone by, right, from the wheel and the hammer down to the internet and the mobile phone. Right. I would say that a lot of it comes down to how the technology is utilized, right? And yes. I think your point there was very well made, Sheree, about the importance of purpose and impact, because that'll still lead the way the technology is going to be utilized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
One question we ask every guest, and it seems like there's a lot of agitation these days, and a lot of agitators these days around this particular area, for sure. But what role does love play in business?
Oh, this is good. Okay. So first of all, let me say that I love that you bring love into the workplace. So let me just start with that, because very rarely do you see that. And I'm going to digress, but I'll come back. When I think about what you do, your marketing firm, your agency, you impact consumer behavior. Like you impact their thought process, you impact not just the buying patterns, but what they do, right, with all of that. And so the fact that you are bringing empathy and love and all of that into your practice and then trying to share it with your clients is huge. So just shout out for that. That's risky. and bold and disruptive, and I love it. And so I think organizations need not to shy away from, you don't have to use the word love, because you might get into some HR legal nightmare maybe if you're using the word love in the wrong way. But
Right. Love and compassion, is that
right. Yeah.
we'll put that and
So
in there.
yeah, so you can be compassionate, you can show care to people, you can think about them more than just a worker bee or somebody who comes into your organization to do a task, right? Or to complete a deliverable. You can build love into how you show up for them in a variety of different ways. I think about what has happened since the pandemic, and maybe it was happening even before the pandemic. People bring like everything to work these days, right? You bring like your whole self. It used to be that you kept your private life private, your personal life, was somewhere else, and you just parked it until you got off work. But that's not happening these days. You see more and more children walking across the Zoom screen. You see cats walking across the Zoom screen, right? So people are bringing their whole selves. And if you're not an organization that can create a container for the whole self, you're going to miss the mark, and they're not going to stay.
Oh yeah.
So that's what I would say to that. Love is important. Love does not, it's not a icky thing. Like, think about this. Humanity is built on love, right? At the core essence of what humanity is, it's about treating each other with some judiciousness and emotional capacity. And that to me is love. And so you can do that in the workplace. You can put that in your policies. You just don't have to use the word love. So that's my thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think you're talking about humanity and stuff. And if we step back and we look at this from like an evolutionary perspective, all this agitation we've got in these areas, it's love just trying to find a way. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And
it is.
Yeah. And if you look at it as love as a force in the business world, a lot of times it's just coming up against sort of rigidity, right? It's just, this is what's happening. And this is why there's some of that agitation here and there, but it's a river and it's crashing into stones and hard rock sometimes, but
Absolutely.
that river's not going anywhere. That river's going to keep flowing.
No. And wear the stones down, right? Smooth them out or get rid of them altogether. That is exactly what's going to happen. And people want human connection. They want to feel like you care about them. Like at the end of the day, that's what people want. They crave that. And when they know you care about them, when they know you have their best interests at heart, they're going to go the distance for you. They're going to give their best effort. They're going to go above and beyond, and maybe even do things that are not quote unquote in the job description in order to help your company and you as an organization and leader succeed. But when they feel like they're just there to collect a paycheck, or you're treating them like just another number, you're not going to really grow your business or expand the way you intend.
Yeah, that is without a doubt. Wow. What a wonderful show, Sheree, we've had today. I know our audience is going to want to learn a lot more, about the work, obviously, given the wisdom and the insights that you've shared with us today. So for those who are on the show, today or will consume the video later on, where do you want them to go so they can learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, I would say the two places to check us out would be on LinkedIn. And so it's at HRKS LLC on LinkedIn, or HR Knowledge Source. If you search that, you can find us. And then our website is www.hrknowledgesource.com. Or if that's too long for you to remember how to spell, it is easy to say www.hrksllc.com. But you can find us really on any social platform, but those are the two best ways to find us quickly. And I'm on LinkedIn all of the time, so look me up.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And we'll put it as well in the show notes below. So we'll put the links in there too.
All right. Thank you, Sheree. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. And if today's episode helped you see your business through a more human lens, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who leads with purpose. We'll see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.